I imagine there's not one of us here who has not slipped and fallen backwards. I'm not talking about a stumble and a fall forward. I'm talking about a sliding on concrete where a patch of mud or algae has accumulated, or the sudden slipping on a patch of ice. The feet go forward, the head goes backwards, you're flat on your back or on your seat. The sensation is that the solid ground under your feet has shifted. Everything changes. The falls of childhood we may not remember, and the memories of slipping as adults grow foggy unless they resulted in serious injury. But our experience remains vivid enough that we know we want to avoid slipping at all cost. All it takes is a small slip, just a little slide, and the emotions come rolling in. I'm out of control. I'm going to fall. Will it hurt? Will I be injured? And all around it, fear. The fear of a new future. I can manage my life as it is now. What if it all changes? The sensation of change, the ground shifting underfoot. I don't like admitting this, but all those fears burst into my mind as I read the headline of an article a couple of weeks ago in the Episcopal News Service. It reads, "Deputies of Color Organize for Change in the Episcopal Church and Society Ahead of the General Convention." It's the word change that lit the fire of fear within me. Change in society? Great, we need it. But change in the Episcopal Church? My first thought was, don't touch our music. Then, don't change our liturgy. What I thought was the ground under my feet at that moment would shift. And then I realized I was reacting like those people I criticize who resist giving citizenship to people of a different national background and ethnic identity. Or worse, those people who persecute their sisters and brothers of a different race or faith. But my reaction was superficial. As I read the article, I saw that liturgy and music are not the target. The church wants to listen to our Asian, Latinx, Black, and Indigenous members as they share their experiences of racism in the church and in society. They will converse with one another next spring in a process called truth-telling, and then next summer, they will bring their experiences to the church's General Convention. Another occasion for me to be proud of our church. I won't talk about all that the article went into, but I will commend it to you. You'll find it in the recent articles of the Episcopal News Service. I recommend, too, that you subscribe to the Episcopal News Service. You'll get up-to-date news about the church around the country and around the world, and it's free on the internet or in hard copy, paper, mail. As I examined the emotions that came when I read the headline of this article, I saw clearly that one, my reaction was superficial, and two, it was solidly set in fear. Fear of change. The ground I had thought was solid was in danger of shifting under my feet if I let myself remain only on the surface, only in the headline. Let's look back at a few words we read this morning in the letter to the Hebrews. It was fitting that God, for whom and through whom all things exist, in bringing many children to glory, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through suffering. Jesus, the pioneer of our salvation, became perfect through sufferings. Perfect through sufferings. When I was in classes in Dallas, I had to write a paper on salvation through suffering. How can suffering bring about salvation? What's their relationship? I had to think about it a long time. I don't remember what I wrote, but I'm sure it wasn't a complete understanding. The point is that this is a theological question that's worth considering, and theology is life. Human life enjoys much pleasure. There is much to celebrate, and we know Jesus, human as we are human, shared good times with his friends. Jesus celebrated joy. He also allowed himself to enter into the tragedies of life, and we believe he did this fully, and that he grieved when he could not say the words or perform the actions that would bring people to accept God's love. But he tried. He entered into the life of the world, not just into the joys, but into its sorrows. Jesus suffered with those who were suffering, and he suffered because others were suffering in their denial of the way to salvation. Paul writes that death was the final act of suffering Jesus could share with his sisters and brothers. But death was not Jesus' intended path as he shared in the suffering of the world. I would say he was willing to listen, willing to turn from what might have been a time of comfort and rest for him to sit with one who was suffering, to lay his hands on them, to suffer with them. This is what we call sacrificial love. This is how Jesus came to perfection through sufferings. He trusted God with whatever change might or might not come. A list of the ways people suffer today would blanket our neighborhood and wrap around the world probably several times. I'm afraid there will always be great suffering in the world, with us, around us, touching us. Mother Teresa famously said, "The poor are here for our salvation." We are made perfect by entering into the suffering of others. Through the ages, our church has been guilty of sin, and that list is long too. We who are the church are, after all, human beings and vulnerable to our self-interest. Much of the sin has come for the purpose of preserving the institution and preserving the power within the institution, misguided as that purpose might have been, and as the church believed its intentions were good, I guess. Much suffering within and outside the church has come of our not listening to one another, not being willing to sacrifice our comfort, our certainty, our sensibilities for the sake of those who suffer. In my lifetime, the suffering of those excluded from the life of the church has been that of women, gay and trans people, black people, and those in minorities. Not that long ago, people who were divorced from marriage were excluded from communion. The church has changed over the past 50 years. Change has come in listening, entering into the suffering of others, taking their suffering seriously and suffering with them. The process in which change has come has been painful for those who spoke and for those who listened. But I think we all agree we've changed for the better. The church's joy in the change toward greater inclusivity cannot be equaled in a static existence. We are moving closer to perfection as human beings and as the body of Christ. Today, we're hearing the voices of people of color and ethnic minorities who have been left out. They follow God in the way of sacrificial love just as we do, and they want a place at the table with us. They want us to listen to their concerns and to address them. They're hurt as they are excluded and sidelined to follow the decisions of others who hold the power in the church. So this is where it all touches me. I resist change. Change is uncomfortable sometimes. even as I know in my heart and in my hope that change is good, necessary for growth, essential if we seek to follow the one who showed us sacrificial love. This is true in all of life, every day. In our families, listening to one another with a willingness to understand. With our neighbor, listening with a willingness not to judge. With those in our community and around the world who suffer. Only entering into the sufferings of others will we be able to address the root causes of their suffering and the possibilities for relieving their suffering. It may be painful, it may be hard. Few of us want to alter our convictions. None of us wants to pay more taxes. None of us wants to do without some of the comforts and pleasures we enjoy. We may even resist giving up some of our time for fun and enjoyment. But if we can feed some people who are hungry, clothe some who are naked, build houses for some who are homeless, spend some time holding the hand of someone who's suffering, then we will be doing the work Jesus taught us to do. And as always, the unexpected gain is our own. We will know unequaled joy as we learn from our sisters and brothers to become one body. That which we fear becomes our salvation. We will be changed as we become more and more the people God made us to be. Like Jesus, we will be perfected through suffering. Will our liturgy and music change in worship? Who can say? But if we hold the heart of the church, which is love for one another, God, we trust, holds the change and what it may bring in God's hands. Change is scary. Like the sudden slip and fall, it can feel like the ground beneath our feet is shifting. We can feel out of control, not sure the way that shift will change our future. But when we do the work God calls us to do, we need not fear. Our work is that of caring, listening, suffering with one who is suffering. We may not see the end of some of this change. Hopefully, we're all changing all the time. That's where faith, which is really trust, comes in. We do what God calls us to do, to offer sacrificial love, and we trust that God will bring the church and the world into perfection. All the changes that we fear, all the vagaries of life, the fire, the earthquakes, the storms, the horrors and injustices of the world, are our times to suffer with others. They are but a moment in God's eternal universe, but to each of us, they are each a critical moment. The real ground of our being is God, and God's will that we become perfect does not change.